Toto Wolff just called Ferrari whinging. And then, in the very same answer, without even pausing for breath, he told you exactly why they've been right to complain all season. Maybe as an overall package, it's us. That's Toto Wolff, talking about the Mercedes engine. The one Ferrari has been saying since March is stronger than theirs. The one that's been sitting under Lewis Hamilton's car, underperforming just enough to keep him boxed in at P2, 50 points off the championship lead. Wolff wasn't supposed to say that part out loud. He said it anyway. And today we're going to break down exactly what he admitted, why he tried to bury it behind an insult, why this connects to a pattern of criticism Hamilton has been dealing with since he first arrived at Ferrari, and why it matters more for the second half of this season than almost anything else that's happened during the summer break. Let's get into it. Here's where we are. Mercedes has had an outstanding first half of 2026. 8 wins from 11 Grands Prix. Kimi Antonelli, in year 2, has gone from a driver who looked overwhelmed as a rookie to a driver leading the championship by 50 points over Lewis Hamilton. That's the story the mainstream outlets are telling you. Mercedes dominant, Ferrari playing catch-up, nothing to see here. Except it isn't actually that simple, because over the last 5 race weekends, something has shifted. Ferrari has won 2 of them. McLaren has won 1. Mercedes has gone from untouchable to still leading, but suddenly looking over its shoulder. And this is exactly the moment Toto Wolff sat down for an interview with Racing News 365 and got asked the one question every Ferrari fan, every Hamilton fan has wanted a straight answer to since preseason testing. Does Mercedes actually have the strongest engine on the grid under these new 2026 regulations? Now, if you've watched this channel before, you know why this question matters so much for Lewis, specifically. Hamilton didn't leave Mercedes and join Ferrari to fight for podiums. He joined to win an 8th title. And every single time, Ferrari's power unit has been questioned, whether it's pace on the straights, whether it's efficiency in these hybrid-heavy 2026 cars. That's a direct hit on Hamilton's title math. If the engine under him is weaker than the one under Antonelli and Russell, that's not a talking point. That's the difference between fighting for a championship and finishing second again. So when Ferrari's camp, and by extension, Hamilton's side of the garage, has spent months hinting that Mercedes has a power unit advantage, and Wolff has spent months publicly knocking that down, this interview was the moment that changed. Let's go through this slowly, because the order of what Wolff says here is the whole story. He starts by comparing this era to 2014, the last time Formula One had a major engine regulation change, and the last time Mercedes came out of the gate with a power unit that was so dominant it basically decided the championship for 6 straight years. Wolff says, and this is important, that what made Mercedes untouchable back then was that their engine was significantly ahead for a long period of time. And then he says, this time is different. Not because Mercedes is weaker, but because in his own words, Ferrari is now right there with them. Close enough that one bad setup call, one missed upgrade window, and Mercedes is suddenly on the back foot. Think about what that actually is. That's Toto Wolff, a man who has no incentive to talk up Ferrari's competitiveness, telling you Ferrari's power unit is close enough to his own that Mercedes can lose an advantage in a single weekend. But he's not done. Because then the interviewer brings up the FIA's own engine measurement system. This is the ADUO program, the Additional Development and Upgrade Opportunities System the FIA introduced for 2026 to try and level out combustion engine performance across manufacturers. And under the FIA's own numbers, on the combustion engine specifically, it's not Mercedes that comes out on top, it's Red Bull. Now here's where it gets interesting. Wolff doesn't dispute that number. He accepts it. He says, and I want you to actually hear the way he phrases this, that's how they measure. Almost dismissive of the FIA's own metric. And then he pivots to the sentence that this entire video is built around. Maybe as an overall package, it's us. That's not a denial. That is Toto Wolff, on the record, telling you that when you look at the whole power unit, not just the piece the FIA officially measures, but everything else that goes with it, Mercedes believes they have the strongest one in Formula One. And then, almost in the same breath, he says this. Ferrari keeps whinging, so follow the logic here. In under 30 seconds of speech, Toto Wolff has 1. Admitted Ferrari is close enough to threaten Mercedes' advantage on any given weekend. 2. Conceded that on Mercedes' own internal assessment, their power unit is the strongest package in the sport. And 3. Used the word whinging to describe Ferrari, saying the exact same thing he just said himself. That's not a rebuttal. That's a confession wearing an insult as a disguise. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Toto Wolff says a lot of things in interviews. He's a master at saying something that sounds like a concession while giving away nothing real. So why does this particular quote matter? Because of the timing and because of who's been saying the opposite thing for months. Fred Vasseur, Ferrari's team principal, has spent large parts of this season insisting Ferrari doesn't have the engine advantage some fans assume they do, while also pushing back, sometimes pointedly, against suggestions that Mercedes' dominance this year is simply about raw power unit strength. There's been tension there all year. Back in the summer, Vasseur even accused Wolff of implying Ferrari's rapid development pace bordered on cheating, after Wolff publicly wondered whether Ferrari would run out of cost cap budget given how aggressively they were upgrading the car. So this isn't two team bosses meeting for the first time. This is a rivalry with history, where Wolff has already shown he's willing to throw not-so-subtle digs at Ferrari's competitiveness and their methods. And now, in trying to throw another one, calling their engine complaints whinging, he's accidentally validated the exact thing they were complaining about. Here's the part that should really matter to anyone who's been defending Hamilton and Ferrari's position all year. If Wolff genuinely believed Ferrari's engine complaints were baseless, he wouldn't need to explain them away. He wouldn't need to bring up the overall package caveat unprompted. He wouldn't need to describe Ferrari's car concept, mentioning the winglets covering half the exhaust, mentioning the high downforce design like he's building a case for why Ferrari's disadvantage is partly of their own making. You only build that kind of detailed counter-argument when the original complaint actually landed somewhere real. This is the pattern we've flagged before on this channel. When a rival is forced to spend real airtime addressing something instead of laughing it off in one sentence, that's usually the tell that the thing being addressed isn't nothing. Now let's zoom out, because this quote doesn't exist in isolation. It lands on top of 18 months of a very specific narrative about Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari, a narrative this channel has pushed back on more than once. Go back to the start of his Ferrari move. The line from a lot of pundits was that Hamilton was chasing a fairy tale that didn't exist anymore, that he'd left the best car on the grid for a team and a project that wasn't built to win, and that his instincts, the ones that had guided nearly every major career decision he'd made, had finally failed him. When results were mixed early on, that narrative only got louder. You had respected voices in the paddock suggesting his difficult 2025 campaign wasn't a car problem at all, it was an age problem. A motivation problem, a signal that the driver, not the machinery, was the limiting factor. That's a serious accusation to make about a 7-time world champion. And it's exactly the kind of framing that sticks, because it's simple, it fits a tidy story arc, and it doesn't require anyone to actually look at the technical detail underneath it. But here's what that narrative conveniently skipped over. If the power unit under Hamilton's car has genuinely been operating at a disadvantage against the sport's benchmark, which is exactly what Ferrari's camp has been saying, and which Wolff has now more or less confirmed, then some of Hamilton's underwhelming results were never a referendum on him at all. They were a referendum on the machine. Every driver in this sport is only ever as fast as the package underneath them. Hamilton proved that for over a decade at Mercedes, in a car that was frequently the class of the field. What Wolff's quote does is quietly rewrite part of the story around Hamilton's more difficult weekends at Ferrari, not erase them, not excuse every mistake, but reframe them. Because if you're fighting a championship leader whose team principal just admitted on the record that his own power unit is probably the strongest overall package in Formula One, then closing a 50-point gap isn't a story about a driver who's lost his edge. It's a story about a driver clawing back ground against a genuine mechanical disadvantage. That distinction matters. It's the difference between Hamilton is declining and Hamilton is competitive against a car that's better than his. Those are two completely different conversations, and for months, the wrong one has been dominating the headlines. And it's worth saying plainly, this isn't Ferrari or Hamilton's camp spinning a convenient excuse after the fact. This is the rival team principal, unprompted, in an interview about something else entirely, handing you the piece of evidence that undercuts the entire Hamilton is finished storyline that's been circulating since last year. Now here's where this gets even more interesting for Hamilton fans specifically, because on the exact same day Wolff was giving that interview, a second story broke that connects directly to Lewis. Ferrari quietly ran a filming day at the new Madrid circuit, the Madrid, the venue that's hosting the brand new Spanish Grand Prix on the calendar this September. Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc shared driving duties in the SF26, running the full 200 kilometers allowed under filming day regulations. Now, technically, filming days are meant to be almost meaningless competitively. Demonstration tires from Pirelli, no proper test equipment, strictly promotional. That's the rule. But here's the detail that made McLaren's team principal, Andrea Stella, visibly uncomfortable when he was asked about it. No other team was told this was happening. Not McLaren, not Mercedes, not Red Bull. Ferrari just went and did it, quietly. And the rest of the grid found out after the fact. Stella tried to play it down publicly. The conditions were bad. It's basically a construction site right now. The tires aren't representative, but then he said something that undercuts his own downplaying. He admitted that even with imperfect tires and a track that's barely finished, there's still something you learn from being the only team with real reference data on a brand new circuit, especially, and this is Stella's own phrasing, with this year's power unit. So think about what that means. Hamilton was in the car. Hamilton has laps on a track nobody else on the grid has driven. And it happened on the same day the sport's most powerful team principal was forced to admit, almost by accident, that Mercedes might actually have the strongest engine on the grid. Individually, these are two separate news stories. Put them next to each other on the same day, and you start to see the shape of something bigger. Ferrari is out there quietly building every small advantage it can find: track knowledge, filming day laps, information nobody else has at the exact moment their most direct championship rival is being forced to admit, in his own words, that his engine might be the best in Formula One. That's not a coincidence you get to ignore if you're trying to understand where Hamilton's title fight actually stands heading into the second half of the season. Let's bring this back to the number that actually matters. Lewis Hamilton is 50 points off the championship lead heading into the back half of the season. That's a real gap, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend it isn't. But points gaps in Formula One aren't fixed. They're built race by race, on whatever car and whatever engine each driver is strapped into. And what Wolff just told us, whether he meant to or not, is that the machine underneath Antonelli and Russell might genuinely be the strongest overall package on the grid, which means Hamilton isn't just 50 points behind a better driver on a given day. He may be 50 points behind a driver in a genuinely stronger car, on a genuinely stronger engine, according to the man who owns the team building it. That reframes the entire second half of this season, because if Ferrari is very close, Wolff's own words, then closing that 50-point gap isn't some fantasy scenario. It's a matter of Ferrari executing perfectly while Mercedes drops the ball even once. Exactly the scenario Wolff described as the thing that keeps him up at night. And here's the thing that should genuinely worry Mercedes. Wolff isn't hiding this concern from his own team. He's telling reporters, on the record, that a single mistake, one bad setup call, one missed upgrade, hands the initiative to Ferrari. That's not a team that feels safe. That's a team principal preparing the ground, quietly, in case things start slipping in the second half of the year. For Hamilton, that's exactly the kind of opening a 7-time world champion knows how to exploit. He's been here before, clawing back gaps that looked insurmountable in July and closing them out by November. The difference this year is that for the first time all season, the team boss on the other side of the garage has basically told the world his own advantage isn't as safe as the scoreboard suggests. There's also the Madrid piece to factor back in here. A brand new circuit on the calendar in September is exactly the kind of weekend where prior knowledge counts for more than usual. Nobody has race data. Nobody knows where the grip comes in. Nobody knows how the tires behave over a stint on a surface that's still being finished. Hamilton walks into that weekend with laps nobody else has, on a car that, according to Wolff's own admission, is racing against the strongest power unit in the field, but is very close to matching it anyway. That's not a small edge. In a championship fight this tight, that's the kind of detail that decides races. Most of the coverage of this interview is going to run one headline: Wolff denies Mercedes dominance. That's the safe version. That's the version that takes his words at face value and moves on. But if you actually sit with the quote, if you read it the way we just broke it down together, you see something different. You see a team principal who was asked a direct question, tried to deflect it with an insult, and ended up handing Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton the exact validation they've been chasing since the start of the season. And you see it landing right on top of a media narrative that spent months writing Hamilton off as the problem, when the evidence from Wolff's own mouth points somewhere else entirely. Wolff admits Ferrari is very close to Mercedes. Wolff admits Mercedes may have the strongest overall package. Wolff calls Ferrari whinging for saying the same thing. The Hamilton is finished narrative never accounted for an engine gap, this reel. Same day, Hamilton gets exclusive track data at the new Madrid circuit. 50-point gap now looks less like a wall and more like a target. That's the story. Not Wolff denies it. Wolff basically confirmed it and then tried to make Ferrari sound unreasonable for noticing. If this is the kind of breakdown you want more of, not just what was said, but what it actually means for Hamilton and Ferrari's title fight, hit subscribe, because we're doing this every single day through the rest of the season. Drop a comment. Do you think Wolff meant to say that, or did it slip out? I'll be reading through them and pinning the best take. This has been F1 Today. See you tomorrow.